So what I'm talking about today is honoring the time that transformation takes. And it does take a while. It takes a lifetime, really. You may wonder, you'll see people that are able to remain at peace no matter what is going on in the world. No matter what, they can remain at peace. Typically, they did not become that way overnight. And I just don't know about spontaneous awakenings. I have heard about people seeing the light and enlightenment taking place in a moment. And I do agree with that can happen. We can see the truth in a moment's time, in a flash. But if you truly want to transform your life, you've got to unlearn a whole lot of human stuff first, okay? Because we are human, and we have all learned a lot of stuff all the years up until this very day. And a lot of it is not healthy. A lot of it is unhealthy biases, unhealthy choices, ways of living. But unfortunately, we've normalized it, feeling that it's normal and comfortable for us to fall back into that pattern. There's a man named Nikos Kazantzakis. He's the author of Zorba the Greek. And he told about a time in his younger life when he learned something incredibly valuable. And that you can't rush things before their time. What he did, he came across a cocoon that was ready to become a butterfly in an on an olive tree branch. So he had the bright idea, he thought he'd help it along. So he leans in very close to the cocoon and starts breathing on it. Thinking, well, this will help it open and become a butterfly even sooner. I think I can improve on nature, he's thinking. And so unfortunately what happened was that he observed the butterfly emerging, and it was emerging before its time. It was emerging before it was ready. And what happens is that he didn't realize is that the activity of coming out of the cocoon and becoming free and becoming a butterfly, the butterfly uses all its ingenuity and creativity, and it's building all of its muscles to go out into the world and be strong. And because it did not spend the time to do that, it emerged into the world and it was weak. And it couldn't fly, and then it eventually died within a few hours. He said he's learned a tremendous, tremendous lesson with that, and he used that wisdom when writing some of the books that were then made into plays or movies, and he's used it the rest of his life. He said you can't force things before their time. And that's incredibly important. We want to remember that. And sometimes what we do, though, we're unconsciously inhibiting the growth of another or of ourselves. When we're taking a shortcut, we didn't do the work. I know there are some times when you're going to school, or you're going through a trade school, or whatever it is you're going through. if you don't take the time to learn all of those new principles, all those new skills, and then spend time developing and practicing those skills, you will never be a professional at it, will you? You just never will. Did it take you long to learn the drums, Tony, or was that just natural? He's still learning. And the bass and the guitar, and he sings and still learning all those things. We're all still learning. We're all, each and every one of us, we're a work in progress. There's a story of a church in North Carolina along the coast, and they were in a low area where there were many, many floods often, and they found themselves flooded out. And the problem was they bought this little lot when they were very, very small, and the land was all they had the money for. And as time went on, they grew and they wanted a better place for their church. And so the highest hill in the town was owned by this one man, and he didn't have it for sale, though. He was going to keep it. But they thought they'd go and just see if they could work on his better nature and talk him into selling that to them. But he wouldn't do it. He would not sell that piece of land. He was going to keep it. So one of the worst floods that ever happened, they're in a coastal region. And so they were subject to the tides there. And the highest tide ever that had come in came in this one time. And it just turns out that the church had finally rebuilt a new building, but they were still on their old space. And so with these floods that came in, they picked up the new building, moved it down the street, turned the corner, and of course the water was very high, and planted it on that hill where they had wanted to build their church. So the man says, well, I give up. I guess the Lord wanted me to give that land to the church, so now I guess he just gave it to them, so I'll just sign the deed over to them. But that's just sort of a symbol of how our lives are too, isn't it? That when something is supposed to happen, it will happen. You are right where you are for a reason. Right, the location, the place, doing what you're doing. You're here for a reason. Please know that and go forward with that knowledge. Okay, so if I'm talking about spiritual transformation, what is that? It means that you go from living a life where things just happen to you. Right? Did any of you just grow up thinking you had absolutely no control over your life? Absolutely none. There was absolutely nothing you could do about it. You were just subject to the whims of the world. And a lot of people go through great parts of their life believing that. And up until that time, you're simply going along with what you've been programmed to think and do. That's all you know. And when you become uncomfortable enough, a shift is inevitable. But this process takes time, doesn't it? It takes a lot of time. It takes time to unlearn the old ways of thinking and behaving that have long been engraved in your neural pathways and in your habits. You ever do anything out of habit? At all? Yeah, driving. Tammy says driving. I liked her illustration of that too. Yeah, we do. You ever find yourself halfway to wherever you're going and hardly remember? what you were doing on the trip? That's unconscious driving. It's not necessarily good, is it? But it does take time to unlearn these things. It's why I said earlier, yes, indeed, you may in a flash see that there's a better way. You may meet God. You may have an experience of a past life. You may have an incredible experience. You may start channeling. But the truth is, you still have these old habits and ways of thinking. You might have grown up learning that the world is a scary place. You need to be in fear of others. You may have grown up thinking you can't do anything right. You've never done anything right. You never will. You may have grown up thinking you're not creative, that you have no ability at all. And those things are just simply engraved in you. You may have thought that you won't ever be prosperous, that you don't deserve to have money. That's far, far, far from the truth. We all deserve to live a life of abundance and enough. I think sometimes we have too many material things. Not only does it become a burden, and it does, you find at certain points in your life you just don't want to own that much because it's just more stuff to take care of. So we're unlearning a lot of past behaviors and ways of thinking and believing. Thinking and believing. It takes time to develop new ways of thinking and believing. For instance, if you've had an encounter with with God, Jesus called him Father. Abba is what Jesus called the Father. And what that really meant was it was a respected position, not necessarily Father, but it was interpreted as Father. So we can call that higher, the divine, whatever we want to. It can be any gender we want, whatever you feel that you need God to be. And God is an eternal, universal flow of love. That's what God is, by whatever name you want to call it. So once you have that encounter with the divine, and it changes your life, then you do begin to see things differently. You begin to believe differently. You do believe there's hope. And then slowly, it takes time, but you do develop faith, and you begin to trust in your spiritual guidance. And how does that work? Well, the more and more you depend on your own intuition and that inner voice that comes from the divine, the more and more you act upon it, and then your actions are then justified and you see results from it, the deeper your faith becomes. And you begin to trust and act accordingly. You live accordingly. And it does take time to see the results of your new beliefs. But if you'll keep confidence and faith and stick with it, you will see the results. So it takes time. It takes time, doesn't it? Transformation takes time, and we need to honor the time that transformation takes. We don't need to cut it short just because we're impatient. Whatever you're doing, you're impatient with it. You will not do as good a job. We know that. It takes time. And another thing that you're going to miss is the beauty along the way. If you live in the moment and not in the past and not in the future worrying, but you live in this beautiful space, there's so much beauty to be seen. And going at speed should only be done in emergency situations. If you don't hear anything else I've said today, I hope you will consider that. The next time you find yourself speeding along, rushing something, doing a half job of it when you could do a full job. I remember very well my mother was out of town visiting one of my older siblings, probably having another child. I can't remember which one or what, but I was home with, there was a lot of that in our family. There were 6 of us children. But I was home, and I was supposed to fix my dad's lunch that day, I remember. But one of my friends had called and wanted me to go with her somewhere, probably what used to be we called it downtown. Now we would call it a mall or something. But so I'm cooking the usual food my mother would cook, only I didn't cook it long enough. So the fried okra was not tender. I can't remember what else it was. I pretended to cook for him that day, but he left me a note that I got when I got home. And it said, if you're going to do something, you need to do it well. And you made a promise, a commitment to cook this meal. And then you reneged on the time, and you cut it short, and it wasn't good. I've remembered that for the rest of my life. If you've ever eaten any half-cooked okra, you know what I'm talking about. And then my father was such a man that you didn't want to disappoint him. You didn't ever want to let him down. You didn't want to do something that would get a rating of a 3. You wanted a 10. He was just such a man. You honored him, and his name was Dan also. I have a husband named Dan, a brother named Dan, a grandfather named Dan, and a lot of Dans. Yes, yes, yes. So when going at speed should only be done in emergency situations. If you've made a commitment and you decided to do something, do it well. Do it well. And then while the time you're spending doing that, maybe you'll learn the lesson of not committing to doing it again if it's something you didn't want to do. You'll make your no mean no and your yes mean yes, and we all need that lesson all the time. Life was meant to be savored, to find those moments that are delicious. Remember I was telling you about those delicious moments where I have a day or a few hours to myself, and I'm in some comfy clothes, and I've have a good book to read, and I just cozy myself down in a sofa, and nothing else on the schedule that day, no interruptions. Those are delicious moments. That's delicious, delicious. Have more of those. You will pass those delicious moments right by if you're always scurrying to the next place or event, or if you've signed up for too many committees. Just stop. Make yourself stop that. Make sure you have time before you sign up to do other things. Then you might say, well, what about those times when I become anxious angry, blaming, pointing fingers, worried, and other less than stellar behaviors. We're human. We're human. Sometimes we take 2 steps forward on this spiritual path and then 1 step back. Don't persecute yourself for it. We're human. Celebrate the wins. Celebrate the 2 steps that you did make and the 1 step forward. Celebrate that. It just simply means that you're out of alignment with the divine at that moment. We can all get caught up in that. I've seen so many get caught up in that the last few months. Has anybody seen anybody get caught up over the election and politics? Anybody? You'd have to be living in a cave not to see it, right? I'm sure even in a cave you could get the news somehow. Anybody seen anybody upset? You know what's happening to your body when you do that? When you're upset like that, you're killing yourself. You absolutely are. You are. Just stop yourself every time you can. It's not that important. It is not that important. Holy cow, which one of us would be worried about the blooming election if we had a death in our immediate family? You wouldn't care 2 hoots about it, would you? So try that now. You live your life to your absolute best. And be the person that you can be proud of. Be the person my dad would be proud of. Be that person. Be that person. And leave all that. That's not spiritual. That's not us. Leave that alone. You just be the best person you can be. There was a young woman that took her son to Gandhi to ask him to give him advice about he was misbehaving. And I think it was his eating practices or whatever it was that he was doing. His mother didn't like it. And she said, I want you to tell him to quit, that it's not a good thing to do. He thinks about it for a moment and prays, and he said, okay, give me a week and come back. And so when they came back, he sits the young man down and explains to him why this behavior isn't appropriate and that he should quit it. And so on the way out the door, she thanks him and says, well, thank you for doing that, but why did it take you a week to tell him that? He said, ma'am, I had to pray on that and decide that I could do it myself first. Don't you know that's why I'm